basically, the LLM users consistently underperformed.
Something that you make statements like, I can't live without this, I can't live without that. Well, actually, you could.
If you're in a building and someone shouts fire, you don't want to do a whole risk analysis of Thessalonians. Just test everything, hold fast to what is good.
Let's uncover what is better with humans. I'm joined once again by my good friend Richard Lalchan, a digital wellbeing and clarity coach. Richard helps parents and leaders reclaim their God-given commission from addictive algorithms by bridging the gap between ancient faith, renewing the mind, and modern technology. So Richard, welcome back.
Hi, good to be here. Good to see you again.
So last time we focused on looking at mobile phones and technology and the impact, particularly on young people. And that started leading into critical thinking and looking at what does the impact of AI have on our ability to critical think. So let's start off with, what is critical thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a crucial thing in society today, because I would say that, there's very much a dearth of it. And you can see that across the whole, looking at news, you've got people on sort of, say, two different sides of a particular story, just cannot even communicate. They just cannot even understand what the other side is. And this is one thing, I can't remember whether you mentioned in the first episode, but I'm an author as well, a sci-fi author. One of the things about being a writer is that in my books, I have to write characters who might have completely the opposite point of view to me personally. And so to do that, I have to actually understand the other argument, and I have to be able to almost argue the other side for that character. So that's one kind of like area that can really help with critical thinking. But if I was to give a sort of definition, I'd say critical thinking is the ability to weigh, analyze, and decipher information, and our own reactions to it. And that's an important part as well. Our own reactions to it in pursuit of the truth. Because ultimately, hopefully, what we're all trying to get to is the truth of a situation. And that, again, is where you can, when you again look at the news, you've got two different sides of things. And then you get to a point where, and social media doesn't help with this at all, you get to a point where people are just pursuing their own sort of ideology rather than actually pursuing the truth. So again, you just cannot see the other side.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. When I think about critical thinking, and I think about, as you say, the ability for people to, I love that what you said about truth, is we can either accept the things that are given to us because somebody else told us that is the truth, which is partly what we do when we grow up, isn't it? I mean, we start off in life as children really accepting that everything our parents say, particularly when we're young, is the absolute truth because we don't have any other reference. And as we grow old, we get other inputs, and then we start to have to discern and go, okay, well, that is not the same as what my parents say. My friends say this, my parents say that. And we have to make a choice, don't we, as to what we're going to believe and make decisions in our lives.
And that's a key thing, actually, because when you then take that into our sort of modern society now with things like social media, some of that, I don't know whether the listeners have heard of Daniel Kahneman, who his book Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about system 1 thinking, system 2 thinking. So system 1 is basically that immediate emotional thinking. So you hear something, see someone post something on Twitter or on X or something like that, you get that immediate sort of visceral reaction. And so often we respond to that without really having context behind it. So we're just responding emotionally. And that system 1 is important because you think in our past, if you're in a building and someone shouts fire, you don't want to do a whole risk analysis of, you just want to get out there, particularly if you can see it. So you need that system 1. But system 2 is that slower. This is why it's called thinking fast and slow. So we slow down, and then that enables us to then assess and it uses like a more sort of prefrontal cortex, the executive decision making part of our brain, so that we can actually actively take slow decisions so if you look at it, system one is like immediate gratification. System two is delayed gratification. So you're actually thinking, what's going to be better for me long term? And so social media, the way it's set up, and our phones, the way they're designed, and you can even talk about AI as well, it's that it tends to lead towards the system one, because it's that immediate, we want to get that dopamine hit. And so it's no wonder that there's a dearth of critical thinking, because we're almost like being sort of programmed out of it, because we're just going for that immediate dopamine hit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Actually reminds me of another book. I don't want to go too far down the psychology route, but the inner game of tennis.
Yeah.
Similar to that, he talks about the two systems, and these being in the way that your system one is that you needed that when you're playing sports. When you're doing something, you need that immediate, you need that kind of subconscious, I'm just going to go and I'm going to do it. And the system two, and you're thinking about that more. If we overthink when we're doing things like playing a sport like tennis, then we actually make it harder for ourselves than if we actually allow our subconscious to have learnt how to do something and then trust in the fact that we've learnt that. And so it's interesting you say there is positive to these. So it's not the fact that actually there's anything wrong with that immediacy. At times we need to do that, our fight or flight. Often those situations we need something to happen immediately. However, what we want to be able to do is the need to make the choice, and to decide, okay, actually let's just take the example of applications. Applications being designed in a way that is to keep our attention. And it's the instant, it's the gratification, and it's like, I've got to level up, I've got to do this, I've got to, I remember a really early example of this was the original Tamagotchis. I don't know if you ever had the key ring, and you had to feed it every day, and if you didn't, it would die. And I must admit, I got to the point I was like, I'm kind of bored with this. And so being into technology, I realized that, well, what happens if I just advance the time to 1 minute to 12, let it go to 12 o'clock? Of course, then it was the next day, so I could do multiple days in a day.
Yeah.
And, but that was a great example of it's trying to tie you into, there's this thing that I've got to do at this particular time.
Yeah, and sort of more modern follow up on that would be Snapchat with the I don't even know whether they do it now. Don't use Snapchat anymore. But the streaks, that was a huge problem where you had to go on it every day, and so you kept your streak going, and kids were getting so stressed about this. They didn't want to lose their streak if they were going on holiday, and so their parents maybe said, "You can not taking your phone with you." Then they'd be thinking about how to get their friends to make sure that their friends were doing it on their phone so that they could keep their streak going. And it's just like such unnecessary stress that is created by the way these things are designed.
Yeah. So looking at AI, so what are the concerns around if we now bring AI into this equation where we've already got, as you say, mobile phones, we've got applications, we've got social media. What is now the concern with as we bring AI into that picture as well?
Yeah, so there's sort of multiple challenges, and I should say straight off, I use AI pretty much every day. There's so many positive things that it can do, and I'll come on to one actually a bit later. But there are studies coming out that show how AI is affecting our thinking. And so one of the probably more famous studies was by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology called Your Brain on ChatGPT. So listeners viewers can look that up, just Your Brain on ChatGPT. Basically what they did, and this was only in 2025, they randomly selected, and I have to qualify this, I have to say, this was a limited in scope, this study. There was 54 participants of it, and as I explained what it was, again, it's very limited in scope, but it was just an early stage idea of what can happen. So it's important to say that. But so 54 randomly selected university age volunteers were chosen, and they were split into three groups. And the group one, they had to write an essay. Yeah, and they did this over 4 months, so that was interesting as well. So there was like one essay a month. So the first group was they called the LLM, the large language model, and it was specifically ChatGPT that they used. So that was the first group, so they could use that to write the essay. The second group was they called search, they could use Google search to help write the essay. And the third group they called brain, which was basically you just use your brain. And so now each of these 54 participants were wired up to an EEG. So, and what that meant is that their brain activity could be monitored all throughout. And so, yes, so the first 3 sessions over the first 3 months of the 4 months they all did the same thing, so the group that used the LLM, the ChatGPT, they used that for the first session, the second session, and the third session. And I'll come to the fourth session in a second. So they did the same thing repeated 3 times. So the group that used search did the same thing used it for the first 3 sessions, and so on with the people that used the brain. So what they found was that, those in the group that had used ChatGPT, basically they had sort of significantly reduced cognitive engagement. So it's like it was much less than in the other 2 groups. So, and that was over the 3 sessions. And so, it's interesting. And then when it came to the 4th session, so the 4th session on the 4th month, always have to caveat this as well. There had only 18 people returned for that one. So gone down from 54 in the first 3 sessions to just 18 on the last one. But still, they kept them in the same groups. If they had used ChatGPT on the first one, now they switched them. So they had to use their brain. And if they used their brain on the first one, if they were in that group, they had to use ChatGPT. And the group with the search just kept the same, just used search again. And still, what they found, even after these 4 months, even when they switched, the activity in the brain was significantly reduced compared to the other groups. So this is over that 4-month period. And they also found from the LLM group that essentially 83% of those users were essentially unable to quote a single sentence from what they'd written. Yeah, so it affected their memory in that way. It was almost like they hadn't written the essay. So it's really interesting and it's probably worth I'll quote a little bit of the conclusion of the study, because what they said was like over 4 months of the study, the LLM users consistently underperformed neural, linguistic, and behavioural levels. So these results raise concerns, about the long-term educational implications of LLM reliance. And just to underscore that, I was chatting to, this probably a couple of years ago, someone who was an admissions officer for a university in London, and he was saying, so this is anecdotal, but he was saying that that students that he saw that had to write an essay under supervised conditions, if they were unable to use ChatGPT, they just struggled. The anxiety went up. And he was noticing this, it must have been two or 3 years ago. So imagine, how it's got now. So there are challenges. You have to kind of, again, say it with the proviso that this is an early study. This doesn't conclusively mean that AI is bad and it's not going to be good for learning. But it's just an initial study that shows that we need to be looking into this more. And we need to have more wider ranging studies. So we can't just necessarily take this, bear in mind, this was students in a university. We can't just take these results and then apply it to the workforce. We need other studies that are more wide ranging and carried out for that. But I just find it, it is interesting that this is having an impact already. And more people are, sort of discovering that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it makes me think of, and I know what you're saying, it's a limited study and there's kind of caveats, but there's an essence of it to me makes sense, because if we just think in general about, our brain being a muscle, and then actually we've seen this so many times. If we're doing something repeatedly, we get better at it. But even that thing that we've been doing repeatedly, got better at, we can find if we hadn't done it for a long time, we don't necessarily have to repeat it as many times as we did when we were learning it. But it's almost like we have to remember some of those things to get ourselves back to the point that we were. A bit like learning an instrument, isn't it? So there is that element of we can recognize that if we don't exercise our brains, and I suppose really, I guess the conclusion I would say to what you're saying there is we have to be conscious of the fact that using AI to do thinking for us may be beneficial, but we also need to be aware of where's the bit where are we exercising our brain in this process.
Yes, well, that's a really good point, because one of the things in the study that they talked about was this whole idea of cognitive debt. So, and that's a fascinating kind of area where they basically described the idea that choosing speed now, because that's obviously one of the main reasons we use AI, isn't it? Just want to get it done now, more sort of efficiency. So if we choose the speed of AI today, we're essentially borrowing intelligence from the future, if that makes sense. So essentially at some point they're kind of saying that you'll have to pay the debt back, which can come back through more, say, generic vocabulary. You can see on LinkedIn, everyone, if you're using AI, you're getting similar kind of things saying you're getting weaker memory, and you're getting a brain that's less connected. So, it's vitally important, assuming we want to be critical thinkers in the future, that we use AI intentionally, to retain our humanity. And I can come and talk about some of the sort of guardrails which I'm looking into and implementing myself, which might be useful for people.
Yeah, that's quite a kind of powerful statement, isn't it? That we're borrowing intelligence from the future, particularly when we think of AI as, well, it's artificial intelligence, and we're talking about actually its accumulation of the intelligence that's been brought together so far, right? It's a accumulation of human generated intelligence, but then to think about actually as a consequence of using it that we're borrowing the intelligence. That was like, wow, that was quite a kind of scary thought, but actually really just makes you think, as you say, how important it is. So you mentioned about kind of, so we talked about the challenges. So what are some of the guardrails? What are some of the things we can do to support our critical thinking as we move forward with technologies like AI?
Yeah, and this is a really important area, because there are, I think we should get away from all the sort of naysayers and just kind of like knocking technology and things like that and looking at all the bad sides, because there are so many positive things. It's like anything, if you use it in the right way, it can be so beneficial. So yeah, just in terms of like Google search, I always used to have this conversation with people. I used to have a policy of I wouldn't search for something that I knew already. So i.e. basically if I was outsourcing my memory to Google, I wouldn't do that. So if, for example, I knew that the Magna Carta was written in 1218 AD, but I'd just forgotten it at that moment, I wouldn't go to Google to search for it. I'd just let myself remember it in good time. Yeah. Whereas if it was new information and I didn't know that, then I would go to Google, because then that would be, new information you're learning. So that's good. So some of these guardrails are almost like based on that sort of premise. I mean, one important one, which is becoming more and more of an issue, is I kind of say, so don't anthropomorphise your tech. Yeah. So basically, one of the challenges, whether it's with things like voice assistants, Siri, Alexa, but even getting worse when you talk about robotics, and what are they all doing? They're almost like trying to, or when I say what they're all doing, it's the tech companies that are creating these things are trying to make them more human. Yeah, and so this is the first guardrail I would say is don't treat your tech as though it's human. So take Siri. I have various HomePods around the house, and I used to, when I first got it, I would call her, yeah, and I'd say please and thank you and things like that, and then a few years ago, I'm like, why am I doing this? It's a piece of plastic and metal. It's technology. It's not a human. I shouldn't be treating it as though it is human, because that gets into our minds, and we treat, and this comes even worse when we start talking about AI chatbots. So that's the first thing I would say. Don't anthropomorphize your tech. Treat it as it is an it in terms of like Siri and Alexa. You don't need to say please and thank you to them. And yeah, so let's get out of that idea. There's an added thing to tech companies as well, is to don't create things that that are essentially anthropomorphic, that create them that are very different design, different style. They don't have to mimic humanity. One thing on ChatGPT and Gemini I use a lot. We talk about the whole sycophancy. It's like, oh, well, good question, Richard. You're really helping me learn. All of this stuff, the way they respond is just like, no, you don't need that. That's it. Then we're not having a conversation with another human being. This is plastic, metal, tech, and so we should treat it like that. So went on a long one for the first one. The others are more brief. So the other thing I'd say about using AI is embrace the first draft. Yep. So don't use AI for the first draft or the blank page that you're writing. Yep. So what that means is that you're putting your creativity, your critical thinking skills into that document. Once you've got it done and drafted, no harm in putting it into AI and say give it a criteria. Say, this is what I'm hoping this document will say. Does it match up to this? Yeah, and help with proofreading. That's great, fine use. But actually, the first draft, let that be all human. So that's number two. Number three, I'd say, is engage the system 2 breaks. So what we've said already about system 1, system 2. So before hitting submit on that AI chat prompt, hit the brakes to engage your prefrontal cortex. Actually ask yourself the question, am I using this tool to enhance my thinking or to actually bypass thinking entirely? And again, as a one-off, big deal. But when you're talking about using this thing consistently for a year, 2 years, 5 years, that's where it starts to have the effect. So then number 4, I'd say, is the ownership test, which kind of came out of that study. Can you actually explain the logic and the message behind what you've just written? Yeah, because if you can't, then you've probably abdicated your authorship to AI. Yeah, so it's not coming from you. So you really must be able to defend what you write.
Yeah.
And then so number 5 is protect the developing mind. Recognize that us as humans, certainly under the age of 25, we do not have the sort of how can I put it, the matured neurological hardware, to self-regulate against things like the bottomless scroll. So I would limit AI use until the brakes sort of are more fully formed. I'm not saying leave it till the age of 25, 26 when the prefrontal cortex is at its maturity, but before, essentially, I guess as parents and then leaders in schools, universities, need to be able to work with people around that, and just so that they know the limitations and what effect it potentially can have on them. And then point 6 is prioritize the active brain. So look for those activities that essentially promote that that staying in that mode of curiosity rather than passivity. So if you think about, you know, take an example of going for a walk. Yep. So often, what do we do when we go for a walk? We've got a podcast in, listening to something, listening to music. And that, again, they're no bad things. But how about when you're going for a walk, have a problem in your mind that you want to try and solve, something you want to think through. No AirPods or headphones, anything like that. Just let natural sounds of nature and use your mental processes to think through a problem. And then just three more. And this is another really important one. Verify the truth. Don't accept every answer that AI provides, because we know now that AI has hallucinations. So essentially it makes up stuff. And so you can't just accept it. And there was a worrying, I'm not sure I've got it in front of me, but there was a study in Bangor University, where from I think it was 1,009 teenagers that that was in this study. 53% of them expressed moderate to complete trust in the responses from AI. Just 13% expressed moderate or complete distrust. So you've got the majority of youngsters, again in this study, effectively accepting the answers that they get out from AI. So again, we just need to, check results against multiple AIs and against other, Google search, against document studies, and more human-led means. Bounce it off other humans. I mean, that's a radical thought. And then just the last two, in our use of tech, try and align it with our values and not convenience. So by that I mean, if a task is central to your values, then don't outsource that to AI. Use it for the low value mechanical tasks that don't really define your mission. An obvious example there, and as you mentioned, I've worked with a lot of creatives. So if you're a musician, you don't want to outsource your core skill to AI. Yeah. Same with writers, so I'm not going to get AI to write the whole of my next novel. Yeah. That would be the skill that I've got. Me is like what you said before, Sean, about, you effectively use it or lose it. So I want to improve that skill. I'm not going to outsource that to AI. And then the final one is I'm calling this the renewal of the mind audit. So my company is called Renew Your Mind, and the point of this one is essentially to regularly assess your use of AI, and that might mean by having a digital detox, avoiding it altogether for a period, just so you can see that you're not relying on it. And a silly example from probably decades ago now, at the beginning of a new year, I used to just stop having sugar. Yeah, not just because I didn't want to be. I had a lot of sugar back then. I don't really have it there now, but and I just wanted to be in control of that, not just slavishly having sugar in drinks and all that all the time. So I just had a detox, which then allowed me to think about my use. So do the same thing with AI. Let's have a detox. Just see if can you cope with having like a week not using AI. And just assess that and see what you've learned from that. See how you're feeling, because it affects us in different ways. So just come out of that assessing. Okay, this made me feel this way, so perhaps I should change my use of it, and maybe it's using some of these other guardrails that I've mentioned. So that's sort of 9 points of sort of guardrails that can help you use AI in a wiser and I'd say more sort of fulfilling way.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And, just before I go on from that, is that where can people go to get those guardrails?
They will be available on my website, so renewyourmind.net. So it's not available yet. By the time this comes out, it may be available there. But renewyourmind.net will be the place to get that
Okay,
from.
thank you. And I was going to get in there before I kind of sort of summarised a bit. I mean, you covered a lot in those guardrails. And okay, so some of my summaries are, yeah, engaging your brain at the start and the end, right? Through the process. It's like you said about the prompting, and then there's the checking at the end. And through that process of not just trusting in the facts and the figures. I mean, certainly with research, it's I found that so much. I've done a lot of research with AI and found that maybe 10% is actually correct. And you can, and the thing is, you can ask whatever AI you're using you can take the output, give it back to it, and say critically review this, and it will come back and tell you that maybe 8 out of 10 of the facts they're kind of made up or not substantiated. So that's definitely something really 100%. And I love what you said as well. Really, I summarized it as, if you don't need to use AI, don't use it. Which, I mean, there's that, like you're saying about the sugar, the habitual thing, isn't it? Saying, well, I don't actually, as a habit, I love what you said about the, I don't, by not Googling something, if I know the answer,
already,
actually, to come and get it. Because we do have that convenience. The other thing I put down was what are your short-term and long-term goals? So in terms of the use of this, if the short-term goal is, okay, I need to spell check something. Okay, great. Or I need to get this document out. But what's the long-term goal? If your long-term goal, as you were talking about, is to be learning something, then that is not necessarily going to help you achieve that. So if there's a skill you want to grow, or as you said, if it's a skill that you have that you want to continue to work on, then you don't want to be outsourcing that. And this is something I'm going to definitely do myself. Is I already often leave my phone at home when I go for a walk. Don't take anything, and I just tend to sort of just see what my brain will do. I also love the idea of taking a problem and just mulling that over as you kind of walk around, because how often do we give our brains space to think?
Exactly.
I find that we're in this space. I'm looking at my email. I'm doing something else. I'm writing a document. I've got a video call coming up. It's time to go and stop now and have some lunch. Okay, right, I'm back to it again. And then, I would go for a walk, put my headphones in, listen to some music. And then sometimes we wonder why either we have crazy dreams or we find we don't sleep very well, because our brain just needs that opportunity to process everything.
Well, that's a bit of a hat tip to Cal Newport, his book called Deep Work. He talks about that and goes into detail about how it affects our brain, and he used that specifically when walking to work to actually just solve different problems.
Yeah, and I think, and the other thing I really loved as well was the value stuff. Obviously, with what I'm doing, it's really much about values and making our choices around our purpose and our values and where do we want to be going. So I really love what you spoke about the aligning the technology. If you can use it, okay, that's not a problem using it. But if you're using it and it doesn't align with your values, or it's not actually taking you closer to where you want to get to, and it's just it's a shortcut that maybe is helpful in the short term but not long term, then reconsider that. And
Can I mention something off the back of that? Quickly. So in talking about values, those listening and watching that might be Christian, here's a good, interesting thing to look at. There's a new AI called Dominion AI. It's located at the website is dominion.chat. And this is, I signed up for it recently, and this is a great alternative AI chat system, and it has a Christian worldview, so it's not going to, suit everyone, but it tries to counter some of the issues that we've talked about, such as the sort of sycophancy. We didn't mention things like, always asking that follow-up question, things like that. So it doesn't do that. It doesn't ask those, forcing you down, trying to force you down a particular direction. It just gives you the answer, and then it will give you, and it also might give you a sort of Christian perspective on it. I mean, I can give you an example of one output that I used on it, if
Okay.
that's useful. So when I talked about that study, Your Brain on ChatGPT, so I summarized that myself after reading the reports and just wrote that myself. And then I put that into Dominion Chat and said, check this against the main report. Is what I'm saying accurate and clear? And so it did that just as Gemini, ChatGPT would do, and it came back with the things that I needed to look at. And then at the end of that, it said, a Christian perspective, I'll read this, a Christian perspective on wise tool use. Scripture celebrates human creativity, then it gives a Bible verse, yet warns against slothful dependence. Technology like AI can be a gift that multiplies our stewardship, but if we lean on it uncritically, we risk atrophying the very faculties God calls us to cultivate. The study's tentative findings, therefore, offer a timely empirical nudge toward disciplined, active learning rather than passive outsourcing of thought. Receive the tool with gratitude, but, and then it quotes a Bible verse, 1 Thessalonians, says, test everything, hold fast to what is good. And so you're getting the answers that you would from the others, but then you're getting that perspective. So yeah, so I've found that really useful, and I'll continue to test it because it is fairly new. So yeah, there are slowly becoming other alternatives as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Richard. And it's so interesting that there are so many kind of concepts. So we talk particularly come out of the Bible that we use all day to day, not when we don't realize it. But this element of when we take anything, it doesn't even have to be technology, but we take something that we idolize, something that takes our focus and becomes a material thing in our lives that becomes the pursuit of it. It's not a help for it. Help, whether somebody's Christian or whatever other faith or atheist, it isn't good for anybody. I mean, that's and statistically we're seeing that with the technology, but the reality is it isn't just about technology. If there's something that you make statements like, I can't live without this, I can't live without that. Well, actually you could, but if you're telling yourself you can't, that's going to be a challenge. And just to kind of close, and it's interesting that you talked about the sycophancy, because I thought, and I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here. It's not something we discussed, but I trust we can work this one out through this one. So with ChatGPT 4.0, and that was known to particularly to be sycophantic, particularly to tell people what they wanted to hear, to the degree that it's being shut down. But there are people that are wanting to save it because they have grown attached to it, that they actually have, what they would consider life partners in that. Now, obviously, we're not judging any of those people, and I'm just curious as to when we think about the guardrails, what would you say to those people in terms of how how they can. I don't want to say change that because they're in their own world, but how can we support them in terms of what may be useful to them as they work through that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and all pervasive. If you think about it, you've got those sort of addictive tendencies. It's very difficult to use the word addiction because some of these things are not classed as an actual sort of on the DSM-5 psychology addictions. So it's not seen as an addiction as yet, but yeah, essentially you've got those problematic use is one of the things that a lot of the studies describe, and so it's about all the situations are individual. So understanding that individual, what they've been through, all the different challenges they might have had, what's led them to be having such a reliance on that, what's their family network, what's their wider network, friends network. So there's so many things that would need to be looked at in individual circumstances to be able to help any individual person. But the positive thing that can really be said is that there is no one that's beyond help. you know. So so in terms of feeling like you're, because some people felt this with Google are notorious for shutting down different platforms that they've cultivated for years, and then they're all shut down, and you have that emotional attachment to it. And so I think AI is worse in the sense of the way it works. It creates an even greater attachment because people are telling it stuff they've not told any other human being. So this is a real intimate connection, but yeah, you'd need to work on a sort of individual level to see what the different challenges are in that particular person's life, their networks, and what else they've got going on. Because sometimes it's not about focusing on the time. Because you and me, for example, we could use AI for exactly the same amount of time. It could be a long time, but yet you could be using it really good, and I could be using it really bad. So that's why you have to go into the individual use of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my mother passed away in December 24, and I was really forgetful for about 6 months. And I was actually, for the first couple of months, I was really quite concerned about it because I was just forgetting. I had to just basically cancel all my meetings because I was forgetting them, even if they're in my calendar or my board, I was forgetting all these things. And I ended up doing this course called Bereavement Journey. And one of the things they explained in that was that with bereavement, all sorts of things can come out of that. Somebody that really got into eating baby rusks, and eventually she stopped, and eventually I could start remembering again. Or I got into a thing as well of just listening to 80s music all the time because I just felt that comforting. And I think that's the other thing as well, it isn't to say, obviously, like you're saying, it's all about the individual needs, and there might be a period of time where somebody finds that something is helpful to them, and it may be over time that they just, they're not. But a lot of these things we can recognize that maybe longer term they're not healthy for us. And like you say, I really loved what you said about it's looking at individual needs, and it's not to say that anybody is doing anything wrong. It's really we're just wanting to look at it and saying what is the impact on that, and if we are concerned about our use of AI or the impact it's having us on our children, then hopefully what you shared with us today will help some of those people in terms of being aware, right? If we come back to the point of critical thinking, it's like you said, it's pausing and going, is this, what impact is this having on me now? What impact is this having on the future? What impact is it going to have on the people around me and my values and the purpose that I feel called to?
Yeah, definitely. And even sort of understanding some of the biases that we have that we're bringing to this information in the first place. So we have, confirmation bias and things like that. So it's just being aware of that. And once you're aware of it, then you can do something about it. You can't do anything about something you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't even cover bias in AI because that's been it's apparent, but we're not going to have time for that. But thank you so much, Richard. I think it's really been a valuable time to learn a little bit more about critical thinking, but also some of the things we can do to keep our brains healthy in not just through using AI, but I think a lot of the guardrails you shared are applicable to lots of many aspects of our lives, where if we want to keep our brains exercised, then it's almost like we're going to have to be, it's a bit more like people would say, when I was younger, I was really active, and now I'm older, I have to think about going out and exercising. And I think really that's what I'd take home from this session would be, we've got to be conscious about growing our critical thinking and helping our brains if we want to maintain the cognitive levels that we have.
Yeah. It doesn't happen naturally, so we need to be intentional, about it.
Well, thank you, and hopefully we'll have you again on sometime soon.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Cheers, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.